public and interested parties who are not able to attend the commission meeting. I'd like to begin going around the room and ask the commissioners, please, to state their name. We'll start with you, Peter.
Peter Neufeld from the Bulletins project.
Harvey Van Hoven from the Monroe County Public Safety Laboratory.
Richard Denny, the New York State Department of Health.
Okay, Denise O'Donnell.
Bill Dispatcher, the Onondaga County VA. Great Bulletins.
Peter McFarland, Office of Bulletins.
Ivor Goldar from
Ann Willie, New York State Department of Health.
Marina Stylish, New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner.
Great. We do have a quorum for the meeting and excellent attendance given that it's the summer months. We have a very crowded agenda, so I'll try to stick very closely to the agenda as we move forward. The first item of business is a review and approval of the meeting agenda. And I would like to just make one change in the agenda under new business. And I do want to add a discussion of compliance with the FBI POTUS Bulletin 22072-006. I'm not going to entertain any kind of a vote on the issue, but I did want to update the commission members on where I believe we are on this issue, and that was left off the agenda. So with that modification, it's not going to be an action item, just a report. I would ask for a motion to approve the meeting agenda. Second? Okay, any discussion or opposition? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting agenda is approved as modified. The next item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes for April 15, 2008 meeting, a copy of which has been distributed to you in your agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of April 15, 2008 from any of the commissioners? Could I have a motion then to approve the minutes of April 15, 2008? So motion. Second, Peter. Okay, any opposition or discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Right. The minutes are approved. We're going to begin. We do have a number of accreditation items, and we are going to take them in order. We are going to have a vote after each accreditation issue. And we are, to the extent members of the lab are here, going to make arrangements for them to come up and join us in the event anyone has any questions. I'm going to rely on Catherine Levine and Gina Bianchi to help with these presentations. The first presentation is the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences. This is an ASCLAG Lab International report of inspection and recommendation for accreditation. In addition, the DNA Subcommittee did meet and make a binding recommendation for accreditation for the discipline of DNA by letter dated July 31, 2008. Kathy, is there anything you want to add to that?
In your binder, you see the final inspection report from Onondaga County Central for Forensic Sciences, and printed all the remediation steps we reported on. There were 5 non-conformances, and all of them remediated. This is the third laboratory that has received international accreditation. And also the DNA Subcommittee did their FBI DNA QA audit last week, and the recommendation letter was handed out at this meeting. Discussion regarding
Need some help with understanding a little bit about what this uncertainty of measurement component is, what the issues were, and things of that nature.
Are you referring to the third?
Page 4 of the.
And Dr. Corrado has been at all of our meetings and led the DNA subcommittee meeting that I understand she's on vacation. So I don't know that we have anybody else on the dock already. Okay.
The uncertainty of measurement is an issue for the FLF National Assessment, and because it's the lab, FLF has allowed the laboratory to make this certain notification for a certain measurement into their report for notes and a period of time. So that's referring to the effective day of December 31st, 2008, to try to incorporate more certification into the laboratory.
I can see that, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm 20% familiar with what the issue is. That's my problem. I see that they have time to do it. I have no doubt that they will. What are they doing? That's the issue.
We have another lab.
We have somebody who can help me out.
We have somebody be able to answer a question about that.
Was state government stating limitations of capacity for so that what you're saying is although you're measuring whatever standard deviation of that measure, certainty of that measure, that's some pretty big establishing those reference ratios for limitation, something the lab must do based on that they use. Currently, the gas lab international put that in the report so that everybody knows this number they're providing has error rate.
Whatever it is.
So whatever.
Actually, we don't do that as a part of quality control. It is just a different terminology now that they use.
Thank you.
Well, actually, I was hoping to ask kind of the same question. Is it a challenge to not address the status of the measure? And is it the fact that the report's period? So rather than report the toxicology of well concentration, or report the range of someone can respond to that. And another observation is the unique requirements of that letter international. I don't believe it's required for or the international lab team penalty or even comment that it is routine practice, but that's in the
Well,
laboratory.
for us, yeah, it is a routine practice to have the allowable limits, just like in your lab, I'm sure, for the, what is the acceptable range for the controls, what is the detection, what is the quantification. It's just that we have that in our SOPs. We don't necessarily, it's available, but we don't necessarily include it in the reports, and Dr. Tanner is right, it is something very unique to international lab information.
ISO International added this in, that it's required that it be in the note portion of the reports. And previously, a lot of laboratories did an uncertainty measure, 95% plus or minus 3, whatever it might be. But a lot of times, they kept their logbooks or something else, they're required to do it actually in the note portion of the report. So, in a way, it's new, but it's really not something new that we haven't been doing. They're requiring it also for any measurement that is used to make a determination. Previously, if you measured the length of a barrel with a yardstick and it was 32 inches, that was good enough. Now it has 32, well, under ISO, it's 32 inches. That's what's happening now.
There is some period of time before it's uncertain. There's no method. Are you saying because of the toxicology they are developed in the house, it's not just they vary across laboratories, that's an accuracy. It's great to see that the international is addressing issue.
We did have Mr. Keaton come in representing the executive director of that lab. Right, I think it was my first meeting here as chair, to talk to us about the international program. But it may be, as we move along and are reviewing down the accreditation reports under the international program, that it would be helpful to have that and talk about
Yeah, Harvey, you saying, I'm not clear on this, that you now require the reports to, in a formal report to a court, to express measurement error?
The documentation for the case has to have that in there.
So the notes, not necessarily.
So it's lab notes, well, Harvey said the note portion of the report, and so I got confused by that, that's all. When you said the note portion of the report, you mean that the report that you may write up for a prosecutor, there's a section now called notes, and in that section called notes within the report, you include a statement on confidence interval or measurement error or whatever, or are you simply saying that the bench notes, not the report, you state what the interval is?
I'm not sure if it has to be in the reports. Someone here who has been through ISO, I don't think it has to be in the report itself, but it has to be in your bench notes.
As I recall, it's up to, I asked about that in National Bulletin, three options up to the laboratory, how they want their research to be report that I'm starting. They put in the report, they put it in the bench notes, and I think they can also do it in another area in the laboratory. They have to do it, it has to be available. It doesn't necessarily need to be for
Kathy, does the ISO actually have any section at all on what is required in a report?
They do have, I saw section of 5, that detail what the standard for.
But only in terms of, like there's a section called findings, it doesn't tell you what at the minimum you need to put in findings, right?
I don't think that's that much detail.
Right.
Well, I think it would be helpful to go to the source rather than have us give our interpretation of what XLab is requiring of the information standard. So why don't we, with respect to that issue, ask them to provide us with clarification so that there's no correct response. And if there are other issues bring them to our attention, and we'll research them or have someone come and speak to us about it. Any other discussion about the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences accreditation? Okay. I would like a motion then to accredit Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences for a 5-year period and adopt the binding recommendation of the DNA Subcommittee with respect to accreditation of the DNA laboratory. Okay, second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Unanimous vote for accreditation of Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences. The next item on the agenda is the Napa County Police Department Forensic Evidence Bureau Laboratory. This is a legacy inspection performed in October. Napa County was previously operating under an extension of their accreditation from February 6th to May 6th of 2008. Kathy, anything you want to add to this presentation? Yes, do the accreditation first, and then a request for
They had a follow-up inspection on April 14th, 2008, that was materials. That record is now here in the first inspection.
and Director today, let us know here. Okay,
hazardous and explosive chemicals not stored in proper containment, emergency exits, not proper. There's no response to the enforcement finding.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The chemicals are stored properly. The problem we had was that we had no ventilation in the storage area. That's been addressed, it's been taken care of. As a matter of fact, within the next couple of weeks, when something had to up the entire process after so that we gladly got that done. As far as the exit, we're in the old building, we're on the second floor, and there is one entrance and exit into and out of the ladder building. We have bought a ladder that we need to have constructed outside the building to climb out a window. We already have the window placed in, we can actually pick it up and use it. Climb out, we have to have the ladder now attached to the building. We're still in the process of taking care of that. What other issues?
Been verified by appropriate state government.
It's, the ladder is not of that of yet.
Yes, I have one additional question. What the other findings from this survey? Question the integrity of the annual audit specific to firearms criminal section. Findings question the supervisor in the other audit. Findings that were subject to the audit protection. That's not the one.
The supervisor in firearms has been retrained on exactly what's expected of them in Bulletin audits. The supervisor in criminalistics, I had a slight issue with that. That was, there was a non-conformance in the section itself. However, he was following the protocols that we had at the time. Now, the protocols have since been changed, I don't follow those, but at the time, he was following the protocols that we had in place. That's the issue with that criminalistic supervisor.
Lieutenant, to clarify for us, what was the non-conforming that they were alluding to, but you say he was nevertheless applying the then standard for criminalistics? The only reason I'm following up on Richard's question is that, the whole point of oversight and supervisory reviews is obviously critical to quality assurance and quality control. And if the supervisor reviews are missing the non-compliance, then there's a question as whether or not the oversight itself is functioning.
It was in the unchecked criminalistic section. And
Excuse me, are we talking about the 1.3,
Page 24 of the report, 1.3, 1.2.
yeah.
yes. Now, it goes back to the issue that we had in criminalistic sections of the gunshot residue. And when the report was reviewed by the supervisor, that's the protocol we had set up. And they took issue with that protocol. We've since changed it. However, the supervisor, my contention is the supervisor was doing his job properly at the time. He followed the protocols that we had in place. We've since changed it. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
No, what was it? I'm sorry, it's my fault. What is the non-compliance?
The non-compliance.
That the criminalist was engaging in, that was missed, according to this, by the supervisor during the audit.
That was,
Because there had to have been a non-compliance at the
Yes.
time. It
Yes.
can't be, so what was that non-compliance?
that was the 1.4.2.5.
We don't want page
20.
assume when I'm looking at page 24, when they say non-compliance with the laboratory requirements for examination and documentation, are they suggesting there was certain documentation that was absent that the analysts were expected to create, that they picked up during their review, but hadn't been picked up by the supervisors during their review?
Well, yes, but they related to me that what they felt was the problem was that the supervisors did not pick up on this non-compliance. However, we had the protocol, we had the procedure set in place. It was a fairly new procedure. They pointed the error out to us, and at that point in time, we changed the procedure. But prior to that, the procedure that we had in place was followed, and the supervisor had referred to that.
I apologize again. The procedure that was in place was followed by a supervisor, or the procedure that was in place was followed by the underlying analyst?
Was followed by the underlying analyst, and as the supervisor audited that report, he referred to that procedure and felt that the analyst had done exactly what he was supposed to do. That was the issue I took with that particular one, criminalistics. And firearms, yes, we betrayed the supervisor what we felt we needed when the ordinance was performed on the case.
What the national supervisor confidence in the policy.
Exactly.
Why?
And just to, not to make excuses, but we were working on the essentials and feeling that this was important, we didn't even address it.
I agree with Peter. It's difficult to put this discussion in context of what the actual observation. But it would be helpful to me and isn't that responsible for bodies? I know your obligation to ask that is only for the essential percentage of the report.
Something we've ever done before to get these come up? No, but not come before. I'd like to hear from the laboratory directors about covered some of the meetings. I can see that in many cases, they're labeled reports, they are important issues, and it would be helpful for us to have responses, but I don't know covered. That would be, anybody have anything like that in the lab director?
There are certain issues in the report, if I can speak, and I can't speak for everyone, but there are certain issues in the report category which are just impossible for us to take care of. My laboratory right now. I have one section that is completely on the other side of the building in the basement where we're upstairs. And there's just no continuity here.
I think what Dr. Dunn is saying, it would be helpful for us to know that, that you are aware of it and that you can't do anything about it, or try to do something about it that, we can't provide funding for it or whatever. It would be helpful, but I just don't know from experience how many of these are report findings, or whether it would be preferable for us to ask for information if we want them in particular areas, requiring everybody to prepare responses for the findings that aren't required by SBIC.
I think too, this will go away shortly, I think too, because as all the laboratories that are ISO, international accreditation, there are no important, desirable essentials. Everything is essentially essential. So anything that is missed in those types of inspections has to be addressed in writing back to the accredited body. See that report.
Still international doctors get to do it.
Perhaps it would be, by this conversation, the lab directors will notice that we're discussing ASCAT lab or other accredited recommendation, that we would expect them to be prepared to address all those items that were indicated as important do think that this issue of the fact that the lab is located in an inappropriate physical location within a building not appropriate for housing a laboratory is not, should not be minimized. And that if the commission has an influence on the county in saying it's not appropriate for a lab to operate in a room, a floor that has only one entrance and exit. We don't even let our labs work in a piece of the lab that doesn't have a second access and egress. Because of the hazards of working with the kinds of instrumentation and reagents and materials. If the commission can influence the county and saying, will physical plant issues become essential under the international, in which case this will have to be addressed, and the accreditation can be jeopardized if the layout of the physical plant, the exits, the demolition, the storage of chemicals is all unacceptable. Hypothetically, accreditation could be withheld. I don't think we want to get to that situation. So this is a wake-up call that says, this is not a trivial issue and it's permanent through the inspection. And I know it's nothing you can do. You personally.
If I could just answer that, actually, I might have an answer. The ventilation issue, the room itself is ventilated. We just didn't have the cabinet ventilated. The cabinet is now ventilated.
This is where the combustibles are?
Yes. And as far as the laboratory, we are hoping between 2011 and 2012 is projected to be a good laboratory. So they understand. But
Any other discussion, or do you
Well, I
want
would just like to
that
say,
into the motion?
the lieutenant has done a tremendous job here. There's a lot to get done. County Consensus has done incredible progress here. I'm sure what the sense of the committee, the commission is that we'd like you to be doing it under more ideal conditions. Yeah, well, we don't want you. I'm sure you do. So don't do such a good job of hiding it. We're with you.
Any other discussion? Could I have a motion then to approve the accreditation of the Napa County Police Department Forensic Evidence Bureau Second? Any opposition? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. The accreditation is approved. There's also a request for provisional accreditation for question documents. Kathy, do you want to talk about it?
Yes, they had a retirement of the question document last year was 2007. They recently hired a new examiner, and so the last inspection, they weren't better than question documents. And now they're going to want to put that system back on, and they have applied to that lab. For that, for accreditation, submitted documentation, and a letter from that lab stating that they have received the application and inspection has been done. And they will be, taking provisional accreditation like to work.
And the provisional accreditation is granted by the commission, correct? And that's for a period of 1 year. Any discussion about the request to grant provisional accreditation? Yes.
Well, we've discussed the issue before about while outside lab inspects the applicant to the process yield patient group in order for them to come in and look at the appropriate activities and medicine. We've raised the question before that in granting provisional accreditation by the commissioner without benefit of, we can look at the proposed protocols, but without benefit of knowing what someone has observed in terms of whether you're really set up to do this, what the credentials of your qualified analysts are, not picking a human in particular. But I still think it raises a serious issue that the commission may want to consider. not necessarily specific to Napa. But when we authorize this provisional approval and the casework actually proceeds, have we fully considered what the implications of that casework would be if accreditation is later not granted or delayed for some reason, and if serious deficiencies are identified in regard to what's done in the year in between. In clinical world, you get your permit, you do fake split non-diagnostic testing until you've documented that all of your procedures are working and are in place and the technology is complete before you were granted accreditation. So I remain uncomfortable with the concept of a year-long provisional accreditation in this commission and what the potential implications are for the casework that takes place in the community. Can we discuss
Any
it
other
later?
discussion in terms of people with history with the provisional accreditation provision?
Question for the matter. What do you have in place in planning for technical review of the casework?
Presently, we have a consultant contract, and he has actually been working and assisting in rewriting and updating our manual for the section. And we plan on carrying that over into next year for technical reviews. After that, we'll have to address the situation with neighboring counties. The essence of it is impossible to do something like this.
So you don't, in other words, I just want to make sure you had something in place so that this new person's technical review of any possible new casework to address your concern is being reviewed according to the
Right. And the consultant actually has to do the casework. Also, we've been outsourcing to this company.
Yeah, I think you might want to go into the other issue, if you, Dr. Welly's issue about possibility of or a request to actually do regular practice cases.
I just wanted to point out first also before Napa Lab was, after it sent the application and they applied, they would take qualifications to their analyst and their procedures that they had them to look at the materials and make sure that they are ready to move forward on accreditation. We did receive that letter from Napa Lab, and in addition, the issue has also come regarding mock cases and whether the laboratory had requested that they have their mock cases in addition to these actual cases. And mock cases are what they're made up by this outside consultant. The mock cases are something that involve writing and although we're looking at that issue right now, and the project was not practicing it, how to do it on that issue. That will also be reflect your concerns.
You could in one way, and another way.
Addresses the issue that absent that documentation, it's not part of what's before us. And the fact that it happened in this instance, unless we make it a policy that it must be a similar arrangement outside technical review, specified quantity of cases with the attestation from ASPAC that they consider this acceptable. I worry that we still leave ourselves and the lab open to some issues.
And I think there was also a concern that if the work was done on mock cases, and if they obviate the need to request provisional accreditation from this commission, which we deal with before.
We might make a rule that might do mock cases.
Right. So I think it is an area that we need to look at as commissioners to see how we should deal with this situation here.
Denise, this situation is a little different because ASPAC Lab Laboratory doesn't certify individual analysts. And unlike other units in the lab, which was talking about one individual, right? You represented in the letter that this individual was a qualified examiner. Could you give us a little information, since obviously everything turns on one examiner here?
Yes, she worked for the police department.
For how long?
Been there, I believe, 5 years.
In qualified document, any question
More than
document?
5 years. She also worked in the state police for sure.
I'm sorry, did she do 5 years in question documents? Or did she do 5 years in other disciplines?
I believe she did question documents at that time.
And was there any question
There
about?
might have been a mixture of disciplines. She might have had one of those. I didn't.
Do you know how vast her experience was in question documents involved there? Or?
Yes. No.
Were there any questions about certain reasons why she left the NYPD?
I believe I've heard that from somebody from NYPD before.
Well, is there, no, but when you say qualified, is there any objective criteria that she was to
Yes, we have.
qualified?
We have the documentation of the qualifications from that she brought with her. And we also,
But is she
we have
certified?
technical proficiency.
Is she certified in any entity at all? Any?
She's working on a certification from AFPE. Would that be? Is that correct?
Since she's working on a certification, she
Yes.
hasn't been certified by that?
She's taking the tests.
So as of now, she's never been certified by the common professional organization that does certification in that discipline. Is that right?
That's right.
And so there has, at least as of now, there hasn't been any objective entity certifying her as qualified. Is that right?
Yes.
Did she ever testify in court?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Any
Kathy, do you know,
one-legged?
do you know what if that does?
I agree. I agree.
All right. Question, Kathy, what does the athletic lab do before they decide whether they agree to do this review of provision for provisional accreditation?
So they have to consider
I'm sorry, you haven't actually.
on that statement of qualifications for that individual, it would state how many times she might have testified in her experience and her training. In addition, they would have to submit all the procedure manuals for the document section, and I'm not sure if they would quality manuals as well, and the whole large application process, because it's for one business record. And the certification is a voluntary certification, not all individuals are certified. Individual, if they want to pursue that, it's not required.
So what did the athletic lab do that was a preliminary matter? You're talking about the entire accreditation.
Oh,
So just for the provisional?
They had to reapply, and they had to launch packet material, step back, very similar to a full accreditation, but then they be part of the one question document. And they had to let the assignment inspector and staff or the assignment inspector to their accreditation. So as we can talk on that early in November, we asked for a year accreditation, original accreditation was passed, we asked for 6 months. Sometimes we had to ask for extension based on and so that's why we asked for a year. And I anticipated that it would take a year forward for that.
Any other discussion, requests?
You know, I'm just somewhat concerned, only because this is a different situation where everything turns on one examiner. One examiner has, even though it's a voluntary certification, she's not certified. We don't know to what extent she has been vetted in a court of law. We don't know to what extent she has undergone any kind of external or blind proficiency testing personally. And
She said it was not black.
was it internal? Was it internal open? So,
It was, yes.
okay, Okay, so an internal open is the least rigorous kind of efficiency test. And, I may be willing to go along with the vote, but I think for our own, frankly, integrity, I think it would be useful in the situation if you furnished us with whatever documentation you had on her as an applicant, just so. Look, we're dealing with a situation in other parts of the country where people have been hired, retained, and used for a long time, who it turned out didn't have the appropriate masterfulness of the discipline. And it's our job, that the buck stops here, if you will. And I would hate us to simply defer, particularly in a situation where there isn't a series of supervisors and a large internal apparatus within the discipline, just one person, and then a contract for an outside consultant. If we do a little bit more, and I don't know how to implement that.
I don't know if this is a solution or not. Let me just throw it out because I think what Peter said makes sense. On the other hand, we're here complimenting the lieutenant for the job that he's done. He doesn't want to put in a position of practically qualified candidate, then come back and say, by the way, you're not accredited to do this, so we'll find a job somewhere else. So it might be provisionally accredited this discipline or until our next meeting, that presentation that Peter suggested could be made so that we can make a more informed decision. My suspicion is that I would defer to the lieutenant that they are a qualified person. But I see the problems with saying that with any degree of certainty because we don't know a lot about it.
Okay, I think it's important that we not set the bar higher than SWAG Lab set the bar. So I agree with the point I made, Peter, but if accreditation is not required or certification is not required, I don't think that should be the determining factor here. But you raised a number of other issues.
Denise, frankly, when this entity was set up a long time ago, ASPAD Lab was the baseline. It wasn't, and we were actually encouraged, if you will, to set the bar higher as our organization evolved in different areas. It wasn't simply ASPAD Lab as the equivalent of anything you would want here. But all that aside, I personally would have no problem if it was like the biology unit, and you have 20 DNA examiners, and you have supervisors, you have middle-level supervisors, you have all that. But all you have here is one person, okay? So it all turns on the one person. And we don't know very much about the one person, and we're sticking our necks out to a certain extent. And I just think if we're sticking our necks out, then we should know a little bit more. And I think that Bill's suggestion is fine. I'd go along with it. I would go along with the provisional accreditation, but I think in the interim, it would be very useful if the lieutenant could furnish us with additional information so we could at least have some comfort zone.
Compatible with all these comments, I would move that we approve provisional accreditation for 6 months and request that in that period of time, the laboratory provide a report at our next meeting at an appropriate time as to the progress made towards outside lab and any identified problems, deficiencies, QA issues, and the progress of the individual towards seeking certification. I don't necessarily want to see the person's CV or their job applicant, which avoid discussing individuals as possible. Having a progress report within that 6-month period would be useful.
May I second that question?
Okay. Any further discussion? No. All those in favor, please say aye.
I'm sorry. Lieutenant, do you see any downside to that? It's not going to affect our employment or...
No, sir, I have no problem whatsoever.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion is approved, and there is a provisional accreditation for 6 months under the qualifications that were stated in the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And congratulations. The next item on the agenda is the Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner Forensic Toxicology Laboratory, the ABFT, report of inspection at Toxicology Laboratory, Dr. Vito, is here. If you want to come join us, we'd appreciate it. And Kathy,
Yes, they had their inspection May 6th this year, and on page 26 there is some recommended corrective actions. These have all been, the DFT has during the day of met all their essential and required member report and desirable criteria. So they are accredited by DFT for 32 years till June 30th, 2010. Any questions for Dr. Vito in our current section?
yes, Dr. Day?
Yes, once again, we're important findings, recommendations for the what's recommended for requesting the observation. Of course, there was no response. We have to be report. No response. There are a couple findings that are concerned. I'm not going to talk about this. For instance, training. I'm looking at page 4 of the report, B6, and also B10. B10, the comment is that there is no formal written policy on training. In B6, the question is personnel experience and training documented? If you wish to response, yes. But in fact, there are no training checklists no longer used. So I'm not certain what the survey team reviewed to allow them to respond, yes. I understand it can happen in the laboratory field, it's not documented what it's done. But my question to you is, given the fact that there were some important findings, did you address them?
I haven't run through them to see that we addressed them all. There are candidates.
What is it? The SOT, this is, reported that event techniques, excerpts, SOT excerpts, and that they were inconsistent with the approval. This is page 6, C11. The laboratory used to be able to see that event, are they in agreement with SOT in response to the note? Certainly that's something that needs to be read.
I believe that actually refers to the fact that if we use, and we don't use abbreviated receipts.
So that's not accurate. All right, so my question is, the important one is really addressed formally.
Generally speaking, they were.
And I would say there would be value to the reviewer having to very close to have feedback on what was done in the laboratory.
We often address these in the interim inspection of the next year. That's where we usually tend to comment. And when we do the paperwork application in the year between inspections, we're usually commenting on the last inspection, what changes have been made relative to recommendations. So I'm just saying that there is written comment generally, and usually comes that year after.
So the training program,
We don't use the checklist because we just haven't found it to be a useful tool. We have a program that I think it could use more detail in terms of writing examples.
Any other questions for Dr. Vito? So could I have a motion then about accreditation of the Monroe County Toxicology Laboratory? It's Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. Motion to approve accreditation. The next matter on the agenda is the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office of Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. We have Dr. Bob. He's not here. Okay, but actually they had an excellent report, as I recall. So, Kathy, just speak about your report of the Erie County Lab.
Erie County inspections have been made in 9 2008, and there were no recommended corrective action, and non-remaining for inspection purposes. Against the administrator for a period of 2 years, July 1st, 2008, to June 30th, 2009.
Is there any discussion about the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office Toxicology Laboratory? Maybe up to you first. It seems fairly unusual in this day and age that we get a report that doesn't have recommended corrective action. Nice from a regulatory point of view, so I hope they all start coming in that way. I know it's much more complex than that, but it seems like a very favorable report. Is there a motion to approve accreditation? Any second to the motion? Okay, all those in favor of accreditation for the Erie County Medical Examiner Office of Forensic Toxicology Laboratory, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The accreditation is approved.
Maybe one comment, maybe to address some of the concerns that, I very much agree with you about putting the responses to the report. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I think July 1, I'm the president for DFT. And actually, some of the things that you brought up, we're more working on addressing those. So, I will take all of this back to the board.
I think if we could ask both organizations, the lab directors, to really look at that and give us your comments, because we don't want to be overly burdensome so that you can't properly administer your lab. At the same time, I think you're hearing a unison concern here that there are important issues that we're just not getting enough information on.
Oh, I just did, but I know one of the,
Right.
ABFT is out of the board.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the New York State Police Forensic Laboratory System report. We have Inspector Gerald Cialski here, who is going to join us, and others. So if we could move and put the chairs together here. If you in here, Gina and I will move down. Okay, in terms of, there are several issues that we're going to take up with respect to the NYPD, the New York State Police Forensic Laboratory system. But the first item pertains to the accreditation report or reports, because there is an overall report and then a report with respect to the branches of the New York State Forensic Laboratory system. So first of all, Kathy, I suggest you to summarize the reports that we received. Oh, Gina, sorry. Okay.
The State Police Department has had an ASCAP lab international inspection in April 2008, which was really 2008. They had 12 corrective action requests.
Sorry, Jake, can you speak up to the
They had 12 corrective action requests, 8 level 2s and 4 level 1s, and they successfully completed all remediation on those. ASCAP lab had a board meeting on 6/21 and voted to accredit the state police system as a forensic investigation center in the 3 regional Midwest here and Western Oklahoma. There's a July 6th letter in your binder from the ASCAP board and a July 31st final recommendation letter from the DNA subcommittee. We also have the certificate of accreditation for the crime lab system and then one for the head the scope of accreditation. And basically, answer any questions I have.
reports, just reading through them, are fairly, they duplicate one another, so there's a lot of duplication in the report. That's because of the funding are repeated in section and different branch crime labs. So, are there any questions?
Yeah.
I know.
First question I have is on page 23 and 24 of the June 17th document concerning reports related to multiple tablet preparations, how they were tested and how they were reported out. I'd be most appreciative if you could give me some insight as to how they were originally tested and reported out and how, and what the changes are that have satisfied. Apparently there were revisions made to the report, testing procedures. Could you give us a little information on that?
Our procedure before, Jerry Ciasti. Our reports before were considered the items that contained the same bag as the contaminated sample. So we would select in our sampling plan a couple of tablets, test those, understanding that they're all cohabitating in the same container, that you could not say they were pristine. So then what we report out is tablet tested, aggregate weight for the whole bag is this. ISO for the term or report. The number of tablets that we did take, and then segregate those out, and we use tablets, one tablet, another bag. So that report then is more clear as to exactly what we done.
Okay, so that was your reason. How do you deal with issues of aggregate weight? You're talking about strict quality pseudo-medications.
It certainly takes resources, particularly if you've got quantitative and purity. So often we're writing a report to just the aggregate weight and then see input from the district attorney's office in the quantitation of the drug.
The only question I had, there was issues of paginating, I guess, certain exhibits and photographs.
In that particular case, we had instructions to our analysts to place things that weren't easily written on, like CDs, into an envelope so they couldn't get separated from the rest of the paperwork. And folks were not initially with a seal. Instead, we said that the seal really isn't necessary in this case, just to make sure it's fastened and closed and don't lose the seal. So that was a change in fine-tuning requirements.
That's what
I think
see what your solution was, but I don't know what, does that meet their needs?
Yes, yeah. And basically it was, we were asking them to seal, date, and initial, and we were saying, as fast as possible.
The fact that tablets which are being tested, the comment by the opinion is that a reader could reasonably assume that all the tablets are tested. Is the report now going to be changed so that the reader can see that the tablet is tested?
That would be a laboratory report that was assuming the stuff of other than
Well, it was, that information was in the case record.
So that would be the report that would be attached to any discovery.
Do we have any knowledge, or maybe you did, because you're part of New York, crime lab representative, whether or not other laboratories in New York do it the way you used to do it, or do they all do it the way that you'll be doing it in the future? Is that the kind of thing that even comes up at the New York meetings of the users group? The question about like report writing?
I think some of the questions about how different samples and testing procedures are done are addressed more in the technical working groups for each section. For instance, the drug or controlled substance technical working group may discuss in their meeting the best way to handle a certain kind of evidence, how is the best way to actually test it or report it out.
Well, I haven't seen the technical working groups. I've seen the best way to test it in the technical working groups. I haven't seen a policy or protocol on how to report it out. That's what I haven't seen. So I'll see a divergence of opinion between different laboratory directors or unit managers about how we'll report something out as opposed to the way they may report it out in Buffalo versus Nassau County, what have you. And does the New York Users Group make any effort to try and develop best practices for reporting things out? So if they're examining tablets in Nassau County, they're going to report exactly the same way that they reported out in State County.
We don't generally, unless one of the twig groups has an issue or problem that they cannot resolve and want it brought up to the lab directors as a whole to discuss and make a ruling on it.
To your knowledge, Harvey, do the twig groups actually articulate how reports are to be written in that degree of detail to deal, for instance, with the issue that's coming up here?
I know they do discuss things like that. They don't have the jurisdiction or the power to regulate that among the laboratories.
I'm not talking about regulate. Do they have the power to promulgate best practices?
They do.
And do they do that for actually the content of the report to the degree that we're discussing here?
I think it depends on the twig and who's heading up that twig and what the nature of the discussions are. To the best of my knowledge, it would vary among the twig. Kathy might have more information because she actually attends all the twigs.
Our office coordinates the technical work group in the state, and this issue has come up. And report writing has come up in multiple technical working groups. It has come up in drug technical working group, but more as a what are you doing in your laboratory situation, and they can learn from each other on that. They can also make recommendations up to 9 if they feel something needs to be addressed.
And have they done that?
They haven't done that successfully for report writing, however, they have shared each other's.
Is there any interest either in NICLAC or in the state twigs to promulgate best practices for how to express data in reports?
The twigs are not policy setting groups that actually are not trying that are actually looking at that to be hard to do that.
But so far NICLAC hasn't done that at all.
Not something I'm aware of.
That was report writing.
You know, I don't know whether or not we have jurisdiction over that. I certainly think we should encourage and work with NICLAC because if it's our job to regulate the prime laboratories in the state, I think as a matter of oversight it would be very useful if a laboratory in Buffalo and a laboratory in Nassau County examining the same item describes the data the same way. Whatever it is. Okay, I can't imagine there'd be disagreement on that. So it would be nice if that's something that NICLAC could be out in front on.
Currently the president, so you have done your recommendation to the right source. Yes.
Does the weight element in the drug reports pose an unusual heavy burden on finance? Weight, just weight.
Yeah, I think that it does the quantification aspect, and I think that's certainly respect to that.
Is any effort being made to ask the legislature for what we need?
If that ever has a date passed, years ago. It is very consistent, with the quantification aspect involved in
There is a matter related to police, the
approximately 81.
Okay. We will now proceed with a discussion of a confidential matter that is exempt from the open meetings law pursuant to Public Officers Law, Section 108(3). What that means, unfortunately, from the people in the audience, unless they are with the state police lab and are not commissioners, I would ask that they step out of the room. I am going to ask, for purposes of webcasting, that we discontinue our webcast for a short period of time while the commission takes on this matter in executive session. So that the webcasting will be
It's only
I can go with you. I can go.
Are we ready? We're back on,
because they didn't trust Brad.
we just wanted to set it up. Okay, we are back on the webcast of our Commission on Forensic Science meeting. I will say, for the record, that we did go into executive session to discuss two matters, which related to possible discipline, suspension, dismissal or removal of individuals with respect to an accreditation matter. We have gone back on the record and are no longer in executive session. We were, at the time that we broke, reviewing the Escalade Lab recommendation for accreditation of the New York State Police Forensic Laboratory System, both with the Forensic Investigation Center, the Mid-Hudson Regional Crime Laboratory, the Southern Tier Regional Crime Laboratory, and the Western Regional Crime Laboratory. We do have a binding recommendation letter from the DNA Subcommittee with respect to the discipline of DNA at those four laboratories. And at this point, unless there is further discussion, I'd like to have a motion to approve accreditation for these four laboratories, part of the New York State Police Forensic Laboratory System.
So moved.
Motion, seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The superintendent is going to abstain because of his relationship with the New York State Police. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you being with us, and congratulations on your international accreditation. That concludes our laboratory accreditation issues. The next item of business is old business. We did have a matter with respect to the Bodie Technology Group that was also considered by our DNA subcommittee last week, and Catherine Levine is going to report regarding that matter. Catherine?
Yes, the issue was first reported by the New York City OCME laboratory at the October 2007 Commission meeting in our annual reporting information. At that meeting, more information was requested by members of the Commission regarding this corrective action, and that material is provided to you in your binder. Just as a summary of the issue, it's during the technical review, individuals at Bodie observed an unusually high number of samples from New York PD laboratory that did not yield a profile. And they self-reported this to the laboratories that this was a potential problem. They retested a number of samples, and they actually used they cut samples instead of using a swabbing technique. So therefore, they changed their procedures and was able to reveal some DNA profiles where they didn't have them previously. So this information was also presented to the DNA subcommittee last week as for informational purposes. And the DNA subcommittee did think that Bodie was proactive in this, so that they identified the problems and resolved the issues adequately.
I know this was an issue that was raised before, I think by Barry, who isn't here, to inquire, because Bodie is a lab where there's a fair amount of subcontracting by many of our forensic labs. It was discussed at some length at the DNA subcommittee, And I think the DNA subcommittee seemed to feel that Bodie had done the right thing proactively by reporting this as an issue, and that they satisfactorily resolved it. I know I don't see anyone here, or Dr. Pizzola here, but we have others from the NYPD lab. If there's any issues, I think they were the ones that were dealing with this as a compliance issue. Peter?
Yeah, I agree. There's no need for any kind of additional investigation. I think that the way it was explained is certainly sufficient. The only follow-up, I think, which might be useful is they quote it themselves. That's great. It is somewhat interesting that they chose the swabbing over the cutting approach in the first place. But to the extent that there may be other laboratories under our jurisdiction that do that, just as an advisory, I think it would be nice if someone could write it up and then distribute it to all the labs that do DNA work in the state, in case someone else is doing swabbings instead of cuttings, and they can learn from this experience.
Any view from lab directors as to whether this is, if they're already aware of this, or it would be helpful, or whether you're the ones that could get this information out, or you want us to do it?
I would think that the laboratories are aware of this because not only did a lot of the lab directors and personnel that do DNA in the different laboratories within the state attended the meeting, but there was also a BioTwig meeting immediately after that, and I know there was some discussion there. So,
but it wouldn't hurt if we could figure it out whether you should do it, the BioTwig should do it, or we should do it, Catherine. We can certainly look at making sure that all of our DNA labs are aware of the issue.
We could discuss it at the next NICLAP meeting.
And get information out to them about it. Okay, that would be very helpful.
It could perhaps be phrased as a broader issue, that any time a laboratory changes the matrix, the cutting versus the swab of the test sample it intends to collect, it should be encouraged to validate that that new matrix is going to give it the same results as the old matrix. That may have been the pitfall here. I mean, yes, it was, the pattern was recognized. They've gone back to using cuttings instead of swabbing, but that may have been the root cause, the failure to verify that this alternative was really going to work.
That's a good point.
I have one question. I'm curious to know what the time lapses were. I mean, there was a series of submissions made. There were quite a number of no results obtained, and then at some point the laboratory figured out that maybe something was wrong and retested. What kind of time consideration, what time lapses were there? Anybody from NYPD answer that?
We didn't come prepared to address this. I was at the DNA subcommittee when we saw that it had been kind of addressed in a very succinct fashion by the DNA subcommittee. We just assumed that it wasn't going to be a topic, so
we may be able to answer that from the minutes. I mean, there was an explanation.
I was just curious. I mean, don't worry about it. Because it seems like it could cause a major inconvenience to your investigators.
Any perturbation in the laboratory's performance is going to cause inconvenience.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think that the emails you have, it was identified like in March 30th or March of 2007, and they notified individuals at OCME lab on April 9th, 2007. So there was a short period of time. But are you talking about the...
Oh, when they were received. You know, this is when they were... I'm just curious.
They show you the list of all the cases.
Yeah.
Eugene, do you have any information?
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, we'll be able to. Okay, there have been 2 laboratory updates that the reports are for informational purposes only. but Catherine can review them quickly. If you would, please, Catherine.
Okay, just the two laboratories have had inspections recently. First is Niagara County Sheriff's Department Forensic Laboratory. They had their inspection on May 7th through 9th of this year. And their inspection report is not completed yet, so therefore it's not up for a vote, but their inspection report is included. There's nobody here from the laboratory to answer any questions right now, but they just had three essential no's, and they're in the process of remediating. And when they're finalized, they'll bring it back before the
I just question the need for the extension. I mean, the findings weren't overwhelming.
No, the extension is due to the fact that they have a certain period of time on their previous accreditation cycle. So ASCOD Lab is requesting that any time you go past that time, that you actually formally request an extension. It's just a formal procedure. So it was only for ASCOD Lab's policy. So previously, their inspection would have ended on July 9th, 2008, because they had their inspection prior to that, but they're still in remediation. Anytime you go past that previous inspection end date, at July 9th for Niagara County, they have requested you put in an official request for an extension. So that's provided.
Okay, and then Nassau County?
Nassau County Medical Examiner, Forensic Toxicology Laboratory, was inspected on June 10th through the 12th of this year. They are currently in remediation, and they have just one essential no. Dr. Rio is here, and he could answer any questions if there is.
Again, it's not up for accreditation this time, though, so welcome, Dr. Rio.
When does their current ASPED lab accreditation expire?
September 10th.
September 10th of this year. I did get the letter from ASCOD Lab. We have been reaccredited. Unfortunately, I got the letter a couple of days too late to get it to you for a vote today.
So you have received it?
Yes, I have received it. Remediation is complete.
Definitely denied.
I'm sorry you have to wait, but can come and visit us again. But I appreciate it. Okay, any other questions for Dr. Rio? We'll see you at our next meeting. Thank you. The next item pertains to a chart which is contained in your materials on forensic laboratory external investigations. These are Coverdale investigations. They are closed out, except perhaps for one of them. But what I asked is that Catherine Levine prepare this chart and keep it ongoing in the future. So we don't have any questions about what matters were referred for outside investigation, and so we hopefully will have a clear record going back to what may be outstanding. So this doesn't contain any surprises, any new investigations, but it's just a new procedure that we're trying to adopt to make sure that we have an orderly system of tracking the external investigations that begin here in the Commission. Any discussion of that procedure? And you can give us feedback as we're going along, but we will continue to update it, and you should find it in your materials at each of the meetings. The next item on the agenda does get into the area of laboratory disclosure items. The first matter on the agenda was a report and a response to a report of the Bianchi Consulting report, review of the appropriateness of actions taken by NYPD Forensic Laboratory Management relative to the drug testing irregularities occurring in 2002 that were investigated by the Inspector General. I know we have Deputy Commissioner Pulaski, and if you'd like to come up and join us, I don't know who else.
My staff?
Yep, whoever else is going to address this issue from NYPD. Let's skip these. The report is contained in your materials under tab 7. I was not aware before receiving the report that NYPD was undertaking an additional review of their response to the recommendations in the Inspector General's report and their own investigation of the matter that occurred. I think that is a very positive step forward, very impressive step forward, that you did undertake that additional step of getting an outside consultant to take a look at what you've done. I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss the report. Kathy, before we do, was that report updated, or is the updated report in the binder?
That one was not updated.
That's the report. Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
After we undertook the corrective action, because it was so large, we wanted to make sure that what we were doing had a look from an outside consultant. The commission was extremely helpful in giving us their comments on the corrective action, and so we retained Bianchi Consultants. Bob Bianchi is a ASCAR lab inspector. He was the director of the DEA laboratory system. He chose a state laboratory system former director, Bruce Vanderkalk, to assist in that endeavor, and the report lays out some of the things that we asked Bob to take a look at. Make sure I paraphrase this correctly. We wanted to make sure that inconsistencies that we found were correctly characterized. So we had a convention that we had decided upon to separate inconsistencies from significant inconsistencies. So once again, we wanted an outside consultant to take a look at that definition and give us a non-NYPD sense of, is this encompassing enough? We then had the inspector look at the inconsistencies themselves and see if we were beginning to categorize these things in the correct fashion. So when the contractor looked at it, when Bob looked at it, I believe we had 42 inconsistencies. And since then, we have been reanalyzing cases, reevaluating cases, and the number of inconsistencies, I believe, has grown by 14. So Bob's comments were based upon on that data that he had available at the time. And we've received recommendations, and we've received some concerns. Many of the recommendations we've actually addressed, and they're laid out for you in the report. And the way we address these is by adopting the recommendation. In some instances, we responded to Bob's concerns, and you have those responses. And overall, we felt it was a very, very positive process. We think that we are going in the right direction. We hope to meet our schedule as projected, which is December of 2008, to complete the project. And really, at that point, I kind of open it up if anybody has any specific questions.
I know one of the big changes that you implemented was hiring considerably more criminalists in the laboratory, and could you just talk about that?
Yeah. One of the things that we saw from the IG report, and one of the things that we got back also from Bob, was the importance of making sure that we had a sufficient number of personnel. So Commissioner Kelly, we self-funded within the New York City Police Department an additional 50 criminalists. That was based upon a staffing model that was prepared by our Office of Management Analysis and Planning. So our original report spoke to an issue of a shortage, but we really didn't have a quantified number. And so we brought the experts in from within our agency as to what the caseload was and the other factors that go into a staffing model. And as a result of that, unilaterally, we increased the civilian table of organization, and the NYPD pay for that, so to speak, itself by moving in other areas and reducing staff, or attriting staff, or not filling attrited positions. And I'm very happy to say that we've identified, I believe, 48 out of the 50 positions at this point in time. So we've brought on board quite a few people. We have requests going up through the system because folks have to be screened. They have to have a pre-employment investigation performed. And so we're hoping to have all of the folks on board by, I would say, December. So I'm hoping that by the next commission meeting, that of the 50 vacancies, that we'll actually have about 46, 47, 48 people physically in the lab. I can't commend the laboratory staff enough. People that run any kind of a business understand that hiring new people is a lot of work, because you got to make sure you're getting the right people. And in the laboratory business, it's extra hard work. So a tremendous amount of effort, tremendous amount of time has gone into hiring what we feel are the right people, and the support that the police commissioner has shown in terms of upstaffing us. That significant amount of criminalists is hopefully demonstrates to the commission our commitment to quality.
Any other discussion about the report?
Yeah, with respect to page 13 of the report, recall inconsistencies identified. There's a statement here, inconsistency impact is characterized as none. If there would be, had that been done, and there was a sense that none of the inconsistencies found originally would have any impact on the charging?
No.
So I'm just curious as to how the phrasing of this part of the document, it seems a little strange.
When you find an inconsistency, we have to try to categorize it.
Right.
All inconsistencies are going to be brought to the attention of the district attorney's office.
Right.
But some of the inconsistencies, we tried to stick with a phrase. We chose a convention, and the convention was significant inconsistency. And on page 9, I believe it is, right, on page 9, the attributes, the definition of what constitutes a significant inconsistency are identified. So in terms of record keeping, so to speak, so that we have a sense of inconsistencies that are of a concern, that may demonstrate dry labbing, you can see is one of the attributes, false identifications, positive and negative of controlled substance, that these are the things that we're going to need to do more work on those cases. So we chose a convention, we chose nomenclature in an effort to kind of engage in an accounting process. And so that's what you see. But every inconsistency will be reported back out to the district attorneys. We're not going to do it by just like sending a report out. We have a group, what we refer to as the customer working group. We have specific contacts, executives in each of the district attorney's offices. And we're going to bring them in, and we're going to go through each inconsistency so that people understand, rather than just kind of get an amended report in the mail and then you're trying to figure out, well, what does this really mean? So we want to make sure that we take the time to explain each and every one of these things. So that's what we were trying to say in here. But for example, if there's an administrative error, that's an inconsistency. That's going to end up getting reported out. But if you have a case, for example, Dr. O'Neill referred to a case in the last commission meeting where it was reported out as no controlled substance, but then as a result of the passage of time, the substance crystallized, it concentrated, and then when a methanol wash was done, what turned out to be no controlled substance, now a controlled substance being demonstrated. Even though there's a logical explanation for the original result, and a logical explanation as to why the new result is different, significantly different, there is a controlled substance, we didn't want that to impact on the phrase significant inconsistency. We didn't want to explain away a significant inconsistency. The idea is call it. That's step one. And then step two is, can we explain it? So that we don't let anything slip between the cracks.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a few questions, so maybe, is there anybody else who has some questions first? Okay. Well, just, first of all, referring to page 9 of the report, when you say that the department has evaluated in excess of 3,000 cases, okay, and there was a reanalysis of a portion of these cases, What portion of the 3,000 cases actually underwent reanalysis?
All of the data, and we'd be happy to provide it again. I just want to speak, and then Dr. O'Neill can speak. Nothing changed from any of the previous data that we gave you. So Dr. O'Neill can give you the exact number of cases, but I don't want to leave the impression that anything that we've previously submitted was changed or the corrective action changed.
Well, no, but last time when you talked to us, I thought the analysis and reanalysis was still ongoing.
It is.
Okay, so that's why I just wanted an up-to-date status report of, those numbers, if you don't mind, sir.
Currently where we're working on is the reanalysis, with approximately 200 more reanalysis cases to do. If I remember the number correctly, it's around 900 cases out of 3,078. Approximately 900, I can't remember the exact number, but we're currently with 200 more cases to perform reanalysis on.
And of the 3,078, only 900 were capable of being subjected to reanalysis because the evidence still existed?
No. We were able to do technical reviews of the casework, and the technical review of the casework had instrumental data, objective data to show that there's a controlled substance present in each unit of evidence. So in some of the cases, by doing a detailed technical review, that showed that the original report is correct.
I'm sorry, should I assume that you have detailed instrumental data in all 3,078 cases?
No. No, we have, on a number of those cases, we have, and I can't remember the exact number, I believe it's about 1,100, we have instrumental data. The numbers are not coming to me right now, and I apologize, I never brought the breakdown with me to the meeting, I left it in my office, but the number of cases we're reanalyzing, is where we discussed last time, is approximately 900, and we're at the 200 stage, we're below 200 I believe now.
Okay, and those 900, so I understand it, those are 900 cases where you don't have the instrumental data, so you would want to reanalyze them. In other words, are you reanalyzing cases where you also have the instrumental data?
Yes, because sometimes instrumental data is not sufficient to show that there is objective data for every unit of evidence. This recall project is extremely complicated, and it will probably take a whole meeting to just explain it, but some of the cases will have instrumental data with them, but we feel we need to do reanalysis to give us more information regarding that case. And some of them will not have instrumental data.
Do you think by the next meeting that portion of this corrective action will be done?
As the Commissioner mentioned, we're looking at December 2008 to complete the recall project, and at that time we'll be able to collate our data and present it.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I have a few other questions for you. First of all, in your response to Beyond Sheet, you mentioned at page 2 that the laboratory is looking for grant funds to acquire transcripts of courtroom testimony. Does that mean that currently the New York City Police Department, as a QA matter, does not even, on a random basis or any other basis, routinely examine the transcripts of its criminalists who testify in court on various disciplines?
I have the QA manager behind me. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but the answer is no. That was not one of the ways that we were monitoring courtroom testimony. Lenny, is that accurate?
That's correct. We don't use that as a mechanism to monitor.
How do you monitor courtroom testimony?
Primarily by getting feedback from the prosecutor or from sending supervisors to court when it's practical to get them to get to court to actually observe the testimony.
But it's your inclination or intention to change that now? So on a regular basis, there's some kind of review of transcripts?
Well, reviewing transcripts would be a nice way to augment the system, but they don't come without a cost. Obtaining the transcripts are not free. So that becomes an issue.
What we're going to do is we're going to study this, but the laboratory management, these are recommendations that are coming into us.
Right.
So laboratory management, we're not sure that a review of a transcript is as productive as sending somebody to watch the testimony. because as everybody in this room knows, the transcript is words, and you don't get a sense of what's going on. Certainly, it will show some serious errors if they're patent, but...
Are you routinely then sending supervisors to make sure that each analyst periodically is observed testifying? Has that been part of the ongoing quality assurance program at NYPD?
Are you addressing me on?
Yeah, Vinny, can you answer that one?
Yes, we try to send supervisors whenever it's feasible and practical.
You know how often it's feasible and practical?
I can't tell you. I don't have that number. Probably not as often as I would like, but we try whenever we can.
I just want to point out that I believe that this is one of the criteria that are judged during the ISO accreditation, and so there are many ways to satisfy these criteria. Sending a supervisor to court is one way, conferring with the prosecutor is another way. There are, and Vinny, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are also slips that we would, in other words, written comments that we would solicit from the prosecutor. So there's a whole host of ways that we can do this.
The problem with the prosecutor, though, or a defense attorney or any layperson, is they can tell you whether a person was effective in communicating with the jury. What they can't tell you is whether the individual was saying things that were incompatible with science, with basic science, because we're only lay people, and you'd want your own supervisors who have expertise.
Well, we do send supervisors there, and there are criteria. We meet those criteria. I believe we go beyond those criteria, but this is not a technique that we have used. We're going to study it and see if this is something that's going to be beneficial to the laboratory.
And I think we should also point out, I don't know that any other laboratory situation is any different, nor is it different with training prosecutors or public defenders. I think throughout the criminal justice system, there is an effort by supervisors to go and observe people in court, but no standardized procedure, particularly that you should have to transcribe costly transcripts in order to supervise.
Actually, Denise, was a standardized procedure implemented by the United States Department of Justice on a random basis after the Bromwich report to routinely and randomly collect transcripts from analysts from the FBI crime laboratory just for that purpose. That was done for a number of years until it was discontinued a few years ago. There are a number of forensic laboratories around the country who, as part of their QA program, routinely and randomly obtain copies of transcripts of their analysts to ensure that their testimony comports with scientific principles and that they don't exaggerate the probative value of the evidence. So it's been accepted as a very good part of a quality assurance program by a number of reputable laboratories across the country, and it's something that certainly laboratories in New York State should consider doing. In the same report on J, in your response, you state that, quote, a thorough examination of any cases where the original charge may not be substantiated is currently underway and will be reported directly to the individual district attorney. By substantiation, okay, does that include cases where you can't either, where there is neither insufficient, where there is neither sufficient instrumental data, or you can't do a retesting of the underlying substance? Are those cases where you could not substantiate, and those cases would therefore be reported to a district attorney? Or do you mean in that sentence only those cases where we get either instrumental data or a reanalysis which contradicts the original finding? Those are the situations that we will report to a district attorney.
I don't understand the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Sure. In J, you said that there will be an examination of any cases where as a result of your remedial action, okay, the original charge, in other words, the charge from a number of years ago, may not be substantiated, that those cases would be reported to the individual district attorneys. My question is your use of the word substantiated.
Why don't we just ask what that means? That might be a good first step.
What do you mean by substantiated?
All of the cases.
Thank you.
Thank you, too. I understand that. all of the cases that were re-examined, the 3,078 cases, have all been reported out to the district attorneys. All of the cases where there is any inconsistency will be reported out to the district attorney. The district attorneys. And when I say the district attorneys, I have an executive who we have as a contact for the laboratory within each district attorney's office, and then they bring in their subject matter experts to the meetings. Once we have the entire project concluded, we're going to go through all of the inconsistencies. We're going to break down for them what cases we reanalyzed, what cases we based our conclusions on instrumental data that covered every single unit within the case, those cases where our decisions were based on instrumental data that didn't cover every single unit in the cases where we homogenized and submitted a homogeneous sample. We're going to go through the cases that have been destroyed, so there's going to be a full disclosure to the district attorneys that's going to encompass all of the 3,078 cases.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Peter, we're going to have to bring it to a close in maybe the next 5 minutes because we do have a lot of other matters on the agenda. So,
okay. Listen, this is the first major report done by an IG on a Coverdale matter and did a very comprehensive report. I think the remedial action that is being taken here should be applauded. But if our job is oversight and we're here to look at that, I think it's really to ask a few more questions about all these documents that have been submitted to us today. I think is more than reasonable. It's warranted.
Well, it may be, but we may have to take up the issue again. I'm just saying that we have a number of other issues to resolve today, and I'm going to try to keep to the agenda. So if we can, if we need to address other issues in the future, this is not a closed matter, so we'll be able to do it.
One more question?
Oh, sure. I said about 5 minutes more if we
Thank
could.
you. In the Bianchi report, under recommendations, it's on page 24. The first recommendation, letter A, says, quote, "It may be within the interest of the NYPD to have the entire case selection process used in the recall project reviewed by an external entity if the laboratory plans to project information to the whole CSAS caseload population based upon a review of a slice of the population." Could you tell us what he means by that?
Sure. When we chose the cases that we were going to review, we looked at two separate issues, and Dr. O'Neill, you can jump in and correct me if I misspeak. The main primary purpose was to look at the three analysts, two of whom had been named as being the subject of the investigation, and then a third person who popped up was discovered when we had some inconsistent data on his proficiency test, and so a determination was made that that person was also acting incorrectly. But because of the fact that the allegation had a collateral aspect to it, that the whole lab, so to speak, I don't have the exact quote, but there was this, intimation that the whole lab was dry labbing, the laboratory staff undertook and pulled cases for reanalysis on a, quote, random basis, but with a specific criteria in mind. And what Bob Bianchi is speaking to in A, he asked us if we used a statistician to do that. And the answer was we didn't use a statistician. So we didn't have a population N, which we identified as a sufficient number for a statistical analysis, and that's what he's alluding to there.
Just as a related question of that, and then I'm done. Did anybody help you? You decided to look at every case in your universe of 3,000 for 2001, I think 2002, or was it 2000, 2001?
It was 2001 to 2002.
Okay. How did you arrive at that decision? Was that done with the help of some either statistician or some other quality assurance expert, or was some other criteria used to make that the universe?
I just want to have kind of like an introductory statement, and then I'll let Dr. O'Neill answer the question. What we were trying to do there was craft a corrective action that would satisfy two things. First of all, it would keep us compliant with ASCLD Lab and obviously meet the ASCLD Lab ISO guidelines. And secondly, we wanted to be assured that the integrity of the laboratory and the integrity of the process that the laboratory is in, the criminal justice system, was not being affected by what the allegations had stated. So that was the premise. In terms of the actual mechanics of choosing the cases, again, I'll let Dr. O'Neill speak to this with a little more eloquence and a little more detail than I am. There are conventions that are used within ASCLD Lab. One of those conventions is that you go back to the last successful proficiency test of an analyst as a point where you can choose something that was done and it was done correctly. So that's kind of a convention that's accepted within the community. It's something that ASCLD Lab, I know, looks for because they need to approve of our corrective actions before we go forward. So, Doctor, I'll let you now take it from there. I apologize if I'm wasting time with my fumbling explanation here.
There was a document supplied to the Commission, I wish I could remember the date, but I can't, where Dr. Pizzola described the cases that we're going to be looking at. Laboratory management, we did not hire a statistician. Laboratory management looked at what could we show, as what the Commissioner said, to show that the laboratory has the highest integrity, there's nothing wrong with our work. So I can't remember specifics, but we looked at the 3 principles. 2 of them we looked at to the last proficiency test, as the Commissioner mentioned. The 3rd individual continued to do casework in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, and we took I believe we took a certain percentage of all the felony cases and the misdemeanor cases. And as the Commissioner stated, we also looked at everyone who worked in the laboratory at that time that this allegation was made, and we selected 10 cases from every examiner who was on the roll call, who was working that year doing casework. And if you add all those numbers together, it comes up to 3,078. But we did not employ a statistician. We looked at, if I remember correctly, the 2 individuals, going back to the last proficiency test, we said, look at all the felony cases. So we had to go through all the reports and pull all the felony cases. Right. And that's detailed in a document you were given some time ago. I just can't remember.
To clarify something in my own mind then, on the proficiency test, though, if that's your criteria, if you're going back that far, I remember in the doctor's report to us last time, he said that the report when this allegation first surfaced, he didn't use a proficiency test, he used what he called an integrity test to see what was going on, and I think 2 of them didn't pass it or whatever. If I'm mistaken, I'm mistaken.
Can I just correct you on that? That was what created the issue to begin with. That was not Dr. Pizzola.
Right, no, it was 5 years before Dr. Pizzola. No, Dr. Pizzola's report to us, he explained the history.
Right, what the thinking was in 2002, which created the corrective action.
Right, and my only question is, if it was the integrity test that they flunked, where they didn't know they were being tested, and they got the wrong result, why would you only go back to a proficiency test if there were proficiency tests in the laboratory, and correct me if I'm mistaken on this, were open proficiency tests?
That's not true, sir.
They're blind?
Let me just address this for a moment. This distinction of integrity test and proficiency test was a distinction without any real difference.
Okay, good.
So that was kind of the problem. It's my understanding of the thinking at the time that a proficiency test would be characterized as an integrity test for a certain reason, and I believe that then the results weren't reported as a proficiency test. So one of the things that we knew and know, and ASCLD Lab supported us on this, is that a proficiency test is a proficiency test. You can call it what you like, but it's a proficiency test. So we didn't use a distinction between integrity test and proficiency test. We stuck with the convention, which is proficiency test, and we stuck with the guidelines, which was a proficiency test. So we went back to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. O'Neill, we went back to the last successful proficiency test, irrespective of whether somebody characterized it as an integrity or proficiency. And all proficiency tests, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are blind tests. So there was no distinction that a proficiency test was open, an integrity test was blind. That's not a distinction. That's incorrect if anybody would think that that's the case. Is that accurate, sir?
If I can just correct you, so some of the cases are open, some of the cases are blind, and some of them are reanalysis. We use all 3 as a way of doing proficiency testing. Opens, where the examiner knows. Blinds, where we submit them through precincts, and they come to the laboratory and no one knows. set for quality assurance, and also reanalysis. And that's the three components that we're currently using, and it was components that we're using back then. I don't have the breakdown of, there's a lot of examiners in the drug section, but we were using all different ways to do proficiency testing.
Okay, so if there are other issues, Peter, particularly if you let us know ahead of time and want to put on the agenda, we'll be able to do that with respect to the report, and I think you'll still be reporting back. I think you said hopefully by December.
We're hoping very much to get this finished, so at least we can report back that it's finished. I don't know what the data interpretation is going to be completed by December, but the project is obviously very significant. Reanalysis, reevaluation, technical review of 3,078 cases, in addition to the caseload that we labor under each day. So we're really trying to get this done. We would like to be able to report this out at the next commission meeting.
Okay. There is another matter involving the New York City Police Department that is a matter for executive session. Before I get to that, I'd like to defer that to our last item of the day, because then we will end our webcast, and if people want to leave, they'll be able to leave rather than wait. But I did mistakenly bypass a few items under new business, I'm sorry to say, as I went through the agenda items. So we do have other items of new business to take up, and you'll be staying with us, so you can come back. I appreciate it.
We'll just take a seat in the rear.
Take a seat, okay. The first item is proposed amendments to the regulations. Gina Bianchi's going to go through that. I think it's a relatively quick and straightforward manner. So Gina, could you take up item under number 6?
Sure. This is just a proposed change to 9 NYCRR Part 6192.5. It's really just a ministerial change to address an outdated Office for Technology policy 97-1, which is no longer valid, and they've replaced it with a new technology policy. So instead of referring to that new technology policy, we're replacing the reference to the technology policy with some generic language, assuming that they'll be updating their technology policy in the future. The subcommittee took this up at their meeting and voted to recommend this change also.
It really is a technical amendment.
It's a technical amendment.
I see the deleted section. I don't see there's not an underline. Did you add
you
something?
have it's in the new material that was passed out today.
Oh, okay. And do you also intend to delete in the definition?
Yes. That's the subdivision 5 is repealed.
Okay. All right. Well, now, in subdivision 1, number 5, 6192.1D.
B, yes.
You're going to delete that
Yes,
as well?
that's
Okay.
in the material that was handed out today.
All right. I missed it in my file. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay, could I have a motion to adopt that change or amendment to 9 NYCRR Part 6192? Motion. Second? Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any extensions? Okay. The next item, and I really apologize, Ivar, is an item, it's late now, so if you want to defer it, we can defer it, but we have, you have brought up at several meetings the fact that we should discuss as a commission our obligation to notify affected parties regarding Coverdale investigations. And so we put it on the agenda so you could address it.
I appreciate that, and I'm trying to rack my brain as to where this letter I wrote, which encapsulated some of my views, and I think I wrote it to Christine Hammond, actually in connection with one of the report that was going out. And frankly, I would just soon defer the discussion of this, except to just throw out onto the table what my concern is. And my concern is, at the end of the day, when NYPD is through with this incredible effort that they've undertaken, or other subsequent investigations are going to, are concluded, and that there's no issue of compromise, whether a criminal investigation or an internal investigation, is what about the people who there is an impact discovered with respect to the results of this investigation. For example, on page 13 of this report, there are 4 or 5 cases in which there's a question raised, at least a question raised, as to whether a particular charge was appropriate. Well, at the end of the day, web streaming may just not, or page 8 of the New York Post may not be a sufficient notification to affected parties. And I would just like to throw out for future thought, and not necessarily discussion today, is how we satisfy ourselves that after all these investigations are concluded, that affected parties have had an opportunity to consider what may or may not have occurred with respect to their cases, or how the system would have reacted had this information been known from the outset. And I just throw that out there.
In that regard, one thing you might want to look into, Denise, as a point of departure, is in a analogous situation, the FBI Crime Laboratory recently entered into a formal agreement with the Innocence Project on the bullet-lead position cases. And what they're doing there is there's not only a notification to any and all prosecutors, there's a notification to defense organizations, okay? And then there's a third notification to the presiding judge of every single district, because most of them are state courts, not federal courts, the presiding judge of every single district where any of these cases occurred where there was questionable testimony.
So would you provide us with a copy of that? Because if you could, and then I think what we'll do is put it on the agenda.
And also, in addition to that, Virginia has a similar experience of re-examining hundreds of cases, and the lab decided not to notify the defense. The legislature of Virginia enacted a law and said the defendants must be notified. Now they're just sitting down now, figuring out how they're going to go about notifying defendants who may be missing.
So we'll adjourn this and put it on the agenda for our October meeting. Okay, and then if you will resurrect your letter and send it around, and if, Peter, if you have additional materials you would like us to look at, we'll take it up at our next meeting. The next item is also, I think, very brief. NICLAC report by Harvey Van Hoven. We asked NICLAC to just take a look at current requirements for education and training of forensic scientists. Harvey, would you like to report briefly on the issue from your point of view?
Certainly. Each of you should have a copy of the letter that I sent to Denise on this in your packet somewhere. We had a pretty lively, interesting discussion at our last NICLAC meeting concerning this. And each laboratory had an opportunity to present their views and opinions on it too. And the second paragraph of this really gets to the meat of it, is that we discovered that there's such a difference in nonconformity in the structure and the services offered or the agency affiliations within all the laboratories around the state. Some of the laboratories are under police jurisdiction. Some of them are county or state. Some have unions involved with their employees. There's all kinds of different things within the different organizations, such that it would be extremely difficult to set one set of rules down, because there's, especially with the hiring and retention of employees issues that come up because of these differences, it would be very difficult to be able to come up with a certain set of regulations or training beyond what we're expected to have by ASCLD Lab already. The feeling among all the laboratory directors is that ASCLD Lab sets a sufficiently high standard for the education and training requirements. However, we do note that laboratories are encouraged, if their hiring practices and such allow them, to go beyond those standards and asking their employees you come to a higher educational or training level if it's possible. We did also note the fact that we have a concern in that although all the laboratories in New York State are under commission jurisdiction and ASCLD lab accreditation and everything, there are a significant number, I would say, of forensic analysis being done around the state that aren't regulated through various agencies, and we wanted to let you know that that's a concern of ours too. And I know it's not an easy thing to address or to resolve, but we did want you to know that that is also a concern of ours.
Like what and where?
A number of, a lot of times a small police agency sometimes will not have access or close proximity to a laboratory, or for whatever reason don't want to send it to them. They may do a footprint examination or something, and they don't really have the background or training to do that, and then they may testify in the courts.
Well, when they do that, is that not by definition laboratory analysis? And shouldn't we perhaps revisit whether or not they also should be in? I know latent prints is an exception, but I was unaware that there were exceptions for other kinds of analytical evaluation of evidence.
And I don't know if our jurisdiction is based on laboratory analysis, it's based on laboratories.
Well, yes,
So-
but when you perform in the clinical
So I
world...
I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know.
okay.
Maybe Ms. Bianchi knows the answer. But I always thought that if police departments choose to actually do any kind of forensic analysis they want, we don't have jurisdiction on it.
I would have been under a different impression, that we define a laboratory as an entity that performs analytical evaluations in the clinical world, and therefore we don't care where they are or whether they call themselves a lab. Simply by performing that analysis, they become a lab. But we might revisit that in the future as well.
Okay, we could definitely look at that issue and get back to you. I think
Because I think that is an issue.
Peter's correct in terms of the regulations, but we'll take a look at them.
I prefer your definition.
Well, let's just look at the definition.
So this is certainly not the end of discussions on this issue, but I know Harvey agreed to take it up with NICLAC, and this is NICLAC's report on how they view the issue. It's not the end of the matter for the commission, but I appreciate your report. Yes, Dr. Jane?
Well, in conclusion, you're asking or recommending that the commission facilitate quality education and training opportunities, but you don't speak to how that might be done. Was that discussed, and do you propose at some future date to provide recommendations?
I think one of the problems with that is what Peter was talking about, is that we know the commission doesn't really have jurisdiction unless it is actually a crime laboratory within the state, and so we don't know how that would be done. We just noted it as a concern, and we had a discussion on it, but we really couldn't come up with any way that would really, it's not something that the laboratories would be able to regulate in any way, but I don't know.
No, I'm speaking to the facilitation of quality education training opportunities.
And we do a fair amount of training at DCJS, so we could try to report back to the commission some of the areas that we're pursuing in the division to focus on training for non-laboratory personnel, particularly law enforcement in the area of evidence collection and retention. Is an area that we're focusing on within our resource limitations. So we could try to address that if the commission would like us to. Yes, Dr.
My thought in the report was, I'm sure it was a lively discussion because this very structure of public employment is obviously an issue. But in order to consider a possible what's needed, what are the gaps, it would be helpful to know what are the job titles that are used, what are the job requirements that are out there,
I don't care about the salaries. What education do the individuals filling those positions currently have, and where are they coming from? Where are they getting their formal education? What kind of continuing education are they getting? And what is the breadth of the variety that's out there, notwithstanding the bar that ASCOT Lab has set, or ABFT has set, or, for that matter, Department of Health has set for the commercial labs. We can look at that bar, but then ask the question, so how close to that are we getting, and where are they coming from, and what's missing? Because otherwise, I think to mount a training opportunity without knowing, are they coming out of the SUNY Albany program in forensic sciences? Are they coming out of Hudson Valley with associate's degrees and then finishing a bachelor's degree in something else? I don't think we have that information.
I don't think there is. There is a large variety of when we hire people. Some of them may be right out of school with a forensic degree, possibly. They may have a science degree and then have some experience in commercial industry or something like that also. They may come from another forensic laboratory, from another state. It's really a large variety where we would be recruiting from, and they get their training and education both from educational institutes, much like any other professional scientist, but also there are a lot of forensic training programs provided by various federal agencies, especially located in Florida and Virginia. Right now there's a lot of money being funneled there federally to provide training for forensic scientists there. And then also, DCJS also provides quite a bit of training for us by bringing in professionals or experts from different areas around the country in very specific areas where it's hard to get training. So there isn't just one way that people get the education and training, and a lot of it does come on the job too, like in any profession. Within the forensic laboratories themselves.
Is there value in tabulating that? Could we go to the labs and tabulate that and see and provide, if you will, a roster of where are those programs, what are those opportunities that might be helpful?
Catherine, didn't we do some collection on that or not? Of data or not really? That was testing, I know, but on
we did something on the qualification of the lab directors.
Okay, but not on...
But, it would require a survey of the labs, asking them, so how many of what job titles do you have, and look at that person. We don't want the resumes, but asking someone to extract from the resumes where'd they get their education, did they get it on the job? Some categories might be helpful. Because, I think Dick's question is a good one. What can the commission do? We don't know what the missing opportunities are.
A good suggestion. It sounds like a big undertaking.
Yeah, it's a suggestion to go back to NICLAC and ask, could you survey your membership, or could you design a survey acceptable to your membership that would begin to gather some of that information?
Well, let's look at the issue. Let's look at the issue and see what can be done. Okay, one other matter before we get to our final matter for the day, and that's the matter I added to the agenda to really discuss, hopefully very briefly, a proposal and discussion of where we're at with reaching a decision on compliance with the FBI CODIS Bulletin regarding exchange with other states as in cases where there are partial matches. Just to kind of go back to where we started with this issue, and I have to say that I think we've been hampered by the loss of John Hicks and our ongoing efforts to replace him at the Office of Forensic Science. But we had one of our commissioners, Commissioner Fitzpatrick, sent a letter back in July of 2007 asking that we obtain certain opinions from the DNA subcommittee. We then had the FBI issue a POTUS bulletin of a procedure that the FBI was coming out with for states to sign on to if they were willing to exchange information in certain select cases with respect to partial matches. We also had a letter that John Hicks sent out to the DNA subcommittee in response to both of those events, asking and posing a series of questions to the DNA subcommittee, and thereafter an arrangement to put together a symposium to bring experts in to talk about the issue both of partial matches and familial searching. The DNA subcommittee decided not to have that symposium as part of their meeting, and it was separately held, and some of you attended. I was not able to attend, but that event took place. We have had requests from Barry and Peter to hear, or for the DNA subcommittee to hear from individuals from the ACLU, from the New York State Civil Liberties Union on the issue of familial searching. We also heard earlier as a commission from Dr. Bieber on some of those issues. They're controversial. The issue of, let me just say this. I think that we've perhaps confused matters by both dealing with the FBI POTUS bulletin and the issue of familial searching, which is in its infancy stages and somewhat controversial and causes a lot of concern on the part of some individuals about whether this is a way that we should proceed. I spoke to Dr. Ballantyne on the DNA subcommittee, and he voiced his concern, which I think is very reasonable, that the role of the DNA subcommittee is not to make recommendations to the commission about policy decisions, but to advise us on scientific and technical issues. So what he has really asked is that the commission decide how we want to deal with these issues and ask them as a commission for their views on scientific and technical issues related to the direction that we may decide to go in. In addition, we have been working both on producing legal opinions on the issues, which has also been slow because of the lack of a director to help us with the scientific issues. But it would be much easier, and my proposal is that what we really do initially is take up the issue that started this. What do we do about the FBI POTUS bulletin, which is I think, much more straightforward issue. And then we can move into these other issues in a very careful way. I think we can hear from individuals that several of our commissioners have suggested we hear from here in the commission, and proceed in a much more careful and deliberative way on the issue of familial searching. But we may be able to move forward in the issue of the FBI bulletin, at least one way or the other, at least getting some advice from the DNA subcommittee and then deciding that issue and then moving forward in the future. There isn't any haste. I think the situation with the FBI bulletin is that there could be a case that could arise, and we don't know when it would arise, and that may be something that we feel is important for us to move forward in. So what I propose, and I'm sure we certainly can discuss this, is that at the next meeting we will both put forward the material on the FBI POTUS bulletin again, that I am going to ask for a vote from the commission to ask the DNA subcommittee to advise us on any scientific or technical issues. If we were to go forward and agree to participate in the exchange of information under certain controlled circumstances that are set forth very carefully in the FBI CODIS Bulletin, and that we then at our December meeting have a vote on the issue so everyone has enough notice. In the meantime, we'll get out an opinion, a legal opinion about those issues as well.
I'm
Peter?
sorry, about which issues? About the bulletin or about
About the
familial
bulletin.
searching?
About the bulletin, not familial searching at this
Bulletin
point.
in December, that's what you're thinking of?
Yeah, and take it up in
The
October.
only thing I would suggest is that speakers, I think that Barry was initially suggesting, were not just from the Civil Liberties Union. There was a scientist at NYU, and there's somebody else who's been thinking and writing on these topics. And I believe that their concerns are not just about familial searching, but also they would question, as a matter of policy, the so-called FBI bulletin. And so I would ask, if you choose to have this discussed, broadly and in earnest at the next meeting, I won't be here, but I'll be out of the country, that you allow a couple of those speakers to attend as well, so they can at least articulate why they would have concerns with the FBI bulletin from a policy perspective, particularly if you want to have an informed vote.
Well, certainly, why don't you send me the information? Only 2 were proposed in the correspondence that I received from you, but...
I think one would be the same, and then the second person is someone different.
So we'll certainly take a look at it. I do think it should be an informed vote, but that is the proposal. We can talk about it again in October. I just didn't want to surprise anybody with it, and I think that that's probably an orderly way for us to proceed right now. And if you have any other concerns, you can either let me know or bring it up at our October meeting, which is going to be October
21st.
21st appeared to be the day that was
Here or there.
that we could get most people. This would be in Albany again, and the idea would be to have our December meeting in New York City. And we're going to start looking for hotel rooms now, so we'll actually be asking you dates when you're available. I, of course, would not want to have this meeting without Peter, but he's going on a sabbatical for quite a while. Peter, you are going on a sabbatical for quite a while, so we
I'm going to put you in 3 months, but
okay.
Certainly these people, one of whom was Professor Troy Duster, the other one, I believe, is a professor at Tufts University, so they're not from the Civil Liberties Union as such. Or perhaps...
Are these the same 2 that were in the letter?
One of them was. I think Tanya Simoncelli and Bob Perry was the second one. So I don't know. There may be different people, but I think...
we'll talk to you about it, and we'll try to set up probably a longer meeting when we take this up than in October.
I thought we were getting a memo on the legality of familial searches in New York.
In the context of the New York
Yeah.
Well, we will eventually, but first we're going to just get a memo on dealing with the FBI and the partial.
It looks clear that it's not allowed.
I'm sorry, so Denise, you said in advance of the October meeting, we're also going to get your legal memorandum on the FBI bulletin, on the legality of that.
Yes.
So you'll get that before the October meeting.
Right.
Okay. Wait in at least 30 days in advance, because I think people are going to want to do independent legal research on that. And there may be responses to that as well. So not just on the policy considerations of the FBI memo, but also on the legality of doing it without legislative action.
Well, yeah, the FBI memo assumes that an individual state is authorized.
That's right.
Assumes that.
Right. So,
okay. Correct. We'll get the legal opinion out in time for everyone to digest it, comment on it, debate it, whatever.
And we'll vote on this in December, whether we hear from alternative speakers or not.
Right. We will. That's the proposal right now of where we intend to go. Okay. At this point, we do have another matter to take up in executive session. Again, it falls within an exception under the public meetings law because it pertains both to potential criminal matter as well as to potential disciplinary matter involving individuals. So I am going to go into executive session? I guess I'll ask a motion. For those of you who do not want to stay, we won't take up any business at the end. This is really the end of the matters before the commission. I thank you very much for coming. I do need a motion. I would ask for a motion to go into executive session. And a second to that motion. Any opposition?
That's probably what I'll do. I'll just use
So thank you all for being here. Okay, we appreciate it.
I have another meeting. What is it? Sorry, I never realized.
that was, pardon? Oh, we're not on this record yet. Okay, sorry. Have to wait for a minute. All right, the commission considered a matter in executive session that was exempt from the open meeting law pursuant to the Public Officers Law, Section 108. 3, a matter that pertained to potential criminal investigation and dealt with a matter of discipline involving employees of the agency, and for that reason, we went into executive session. We've now returned, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion, second. Any opposition? All in favor, please say aye. And any opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Peter, we wish you well on your well-deserved sabbatical. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Where are you going, Peter?